Versan, I yield sometimes. I yield the floor and admit that in many respects, you know more about what's going on with Ripple Tech and with XRP, but I'm moving pretty fast in learning. And in the last, I think, 5 months of the newsletter on golden-jackass.com, I've got an XRP chapter that is over 10 pages long. It is now longer in length than the gold and silver. Let's face it, gold and silver a year or two ago made a lot of news. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, made a lot of news. And now what we're seeing is a culmination. And, someone has said to me, Jim, you're pivoting from precious metals to crypto, to XRP. I said, no, I'm not. I'm extending. I've not dropped off gold and silver. I still follow it closely. And I regard almost all of my forecasts for price in gold and silver to have been realized, successful calls. And now what I'm seeing is some people, Versan, I think you might agree with me. Some people are saying this isn't a once in a century transformation to digital finance. It's more like once in a millennium.
Yeah.
We may not have a transformation to digital for the next couple hundred years, or like what we're seeing now. What could it be? I'm not going to worry about it. Let me just say that we've got a kind of a century event. And it's a transformation where most of the power brokers, like Wall Street banks, London banks, Swiss banks, and to some degree, Japanese banks, they're giants. They have been opponents to the flagship of Bitcoin. And they've joined in a rather nefarious move. I don't like the word nefarious because that's really evil. A complicitous plot to slow down Ripple. And it started about 3 years ago. I now believe, Versa, I'm not kidding. I believe that all the SEC cases were frivolous. They knew they would lose. Some were planning to lose. And the objective was not to win. The objective was to slow down what I call the plebeian, common guy investment in XRP. They slowed it down. I mean, how many different exchanges banned XRP? I mean, I just learned, and I wasn't aware of this. I learned something all the time. There are a few exchanges that ban Canadian clients. I didn't know that. So a friend of mine in Toronto was talking to me. So what we have now is, after 2 or 3 years of lawfare, let's face it, using the SEC to slow down Ripple and to cripple them and to eliminate private, I call them plebeians. We're plebeians. We're little guys, all right? We're not whales. We're not even big fish. We're plebeians. When I was in the YMCA, I was on a swimming team when I was a little kid, like 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. I wasn't a great swimmer. I was just a good swimmer. And you had minnow, flying fish, shark, and whale. So when you hear the whale being mentioned, I think of, okay, well, who are the flying fish? Well, we're minnows, okay? We're little people. And I call them plebeians at the same time. There are not many people who own, like us, who own XRP. I heard that it's 2% of all the XRP is held by people who have 10,000 coins or more. 1% of the XRP is held by people, plebeians, plebes, who have 50,000 coins or more. It's only 1%. So, when people say, oh, they're knocking down the XRP price because they're trying to shake us out, there's not many people to shake out. They're not, I don't think they're shaking out. I think what we have is corresponding decline because a lot of different altcoins are down. There's not a lot to be gained. If they take it down to $2 flat or to $1.95, they're not going to realize another $1 billion coins. It's not going to happen that way. So it's really, and this brings up a really important point of mine regarding XRP. I believe that there is a quid pro quo going on where Ripple executives and maybe, let's face it, they might know 5 or 7 whales, okay? I don't know. They're not going to tell us. They're not going to say, hey, well, we got a buddy who's over in Morgan Stanley and he's a whale and he does favors. No, they're not going to talk like that. They're not going to tell you what they're doing. But my guess is the following. Ripple and the executives and a certain group of whales are working with the coin exchanges. And as we know, they're down 80, 90% in their exchange wallets. I call that the exchange inventory of XRP. Inventory works the same way. Their inventory, their exchange wallets, it's available there for purchases. I've had a couple of people tell me, I worked with Coinbase, I couldn't get it. They said they didn't have any XRP. Okay, this is already starting to happen. So here's my point. The whales and Ripple, in addition to some coin exchanges, are facilitating a magnificent multi-billion coin accumulation by BlackRock, JP Morgan, let's just say et al. Okay? And who's et al? Bank of New York Mellon, Bank of America. If Goldman Sachs isn't there, I'll eat my shorts. You know what I mean? They're everywhere. The giant squid is everywhere. So what does Ripple and Garlinghouse and this vice president, what do they want in return for facilitating a multi-billion coin accumulation by the big financial firms, including JP Morgan and BlackRock? And I think they're trying to get like 5 billion each, 3 billion coins each. What does Ripple want? A bank license.
Fair enough.
What else do they want? They want a lot of cooperation, and they probably got it at the Ripple Swell meeting. I think it concluded yesterday, the conference. They had 20 major financial firms represented there. Maybe it's not just they want the Ripple Bank license. It's Ripple Bank Trust. Interesting name. Okay, I tend to think anyone who names themselves trust, they want your trust. Okay, so that's interesting. I think Ripple wants cooperation to become the global bridge asset standard. They want cooperation. They're going to say, hey, look, JP Morgan, we'll enable you to earn like $100 billion. Work with us. Be our partners. You're not going to work under Ripple. You're going to work with Ripple. This is one of the wonderful things that Ripple does. They make partnerships.
Agreed.
And that was evident with the squabble with respect to Swift. Swift came out and said something stupid and dishonest. We're working with consensus, so we're going to, build our own transfer system. We're not going to use XRP, and we're going to build it on the Ethereum rails. Oh, golly. Just try rotating on this, because it turned out that Thunes, which I don't know exactly, I think they had about 11,000 banks involved in their consortium. They're all using XRP with Swift transfers. Okay, so Swift is a liar. What's Swift's problem? They don't believe in a win-win. They believe in a win-lose. So they won, and they said Ripple lost. They're working with consensus. Who cares? Maybe they'll have something in a couple of years, whereas Ripple had something 3 or 4 years ago. Okay. Okay. Swift, here's my prediction. Swift is going to crawl on their knees and kiss the Ripple ring and ask for XRP cooperation. That it could happen in the next 4, 5, 6 months. Okay. There's another big issue that I've got with respect to XRP. It's not so much a forecast as it is an interpretation. The second big thing, you've got the NASDAQ and its 52 trillion that they want to tokenize. And that includes the FANGMATs, the Magnificent Seven. Those are gigantic. Many of them are over $1 trillion in market cap. Okay. You've got the DTCC, and they're talking about tokenizing derivatives. My gosh, that's not billions, that's trillions. Okay. Yeah. You've also got, what is it, 30 or 50, I lose track, 50 central banks that are now integrated with XRP. Okay. Mm-hmm. You've got a number of different, oh, by the way, that Ripple just announced a MasterCard relationship. So wasn't that supposed to be XLM's domain, Verson? Domestic XLM? Sorry.
Whole different discussion. Actually, there's a complementary relationship there, but another time.
Another time. Well, the way I like to summarize it in very simple terms is wherever XRP competes, they win.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So here's the point, the second point. I mentioned the first about the accumulation in return for a Ripple Bank and global standard. The second point is if a big player like NASDAQ, like the DTCC, like a group of central banks, like in the BRICS, the central banks work a little bit more unified, where the volume is bigger, the savings is bigger.
Mm-hmm.
Where the savings is bigger, it's billions. Where the savings is bigger and the volume is bigger, it goes hand in hand with the requirement of a much higher XRP price, like 500 minimum, 1,000. And you know, we're a long way from there. I've got a few clients that say, what is going on? It now can't even hold $2.50. I said, don't let them shake you out. They're not going to shake out very many. This is a tree that does not have much fruit on those low-lying branches. There's not much fruit on there. They're wasting their time. Okay, so where the big savings comes for the big players, they're going to be the ones requiring $1,000 price or 500. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't like people saying, "Oh, you're nuts. You're nuts talking about 1,000." Okay, call it 200 or 500. Okay, when Swift said they're going to ratchet it in 10%, another 10%, another 20%, it's over the stage of months. It's not suddenly 100%. It doesn't work that way in the real world. Oh my gosh. I tell you, those two factors, the accumulation and the big player requirement for a higher price, just to make it work. This is exciting. And people need to be careful about what they have. I had a client contact me a month ago, and after he bought, I don't know, I think it was something like $50,000 worth of XRP, he got a phone call. Okay, it's a phone call where the fraud is. He got a phone call, and they had his banking information, and he had most recent activity, and he had the exact number of coins that he bought with XRP, and told him that he needed to move it. He lost it all. They lost.
Yeah. Maybe some advice for the listeners. Nobody's ever going to reach out to you about your digital assets. And if they do, those are indeed indicators that you are possibly being scammed.
Okay, let me give advice that goes the next step. And somebody did this 2 or 3 months ago. He said, Jim, he did a consult call with me and said, Jim, something happened to me. Something happened to me. I got a call. It was my Coinbase account. I got a call. And I said to them, well, if there's a problem and I still see my coins, then how bad a problem can it be? But furthermore, why don't you give me your boss's name and your boss's phone number and the office location, state and city, and I'll call him right away. Thank you very much. The guy hung up.
Yeah.
Okay? This is how you obstruct them. Give me a phone number. Give me your boss's name. Give me your name. Give me your address, your city. I'll call you back. If I can't call you back, then you're bogus. And they never call. They never call. They never call. One of the biggest problems, I think, with the coin exchanges right now is you can't call somebody for customer service. Hey, I just got scammed. Can you help me out? No, there's nobody to call.
Yeah. I mean, you know, there's so much to unpack in what you said. And I'm glad you keep moving that around because, you know,
don't let it bother you.
No, it's not bothering me. the impersonators and the scammers are certainly getting out of control with the advances of AI. I've seen some crazy things, videos of my own self. It's my voice, but it's not my face. And it is a bit concerning, if they were saying the wrong thing to undermine our credibility and our reputation and saying one thing and not the other. Anyways, so much to unpack in what you said, and I do want to dive deeper. But for
where do you want to go?
A note, we're gonna take it there. You'll see. For those who are tuning in and new to a lot of this information, it's very important to make it very clear that SWIFT has really been a tool for weaponization of the dollar against countries around that world that wouldn't bow down to a global financial order. And RippleNet indeed did disrupt that model. And XRP was the real disruption behind it because they were offering an alternative, creating a new kind of financial institution, one that was global, instant, and sovereign. I think that's very important. And that's why these big institutions are fighting them so hard. But indeed, their control is slipping. They are losing control very fast, and it's only accelerating. And I don't think they can hold much longer. And another thing to note is that if you start to look at all of Ripple's developments and the expansion, it's a growing realization, you could say, that Ripple isn't just building payment corridors. They're actually rewiring finance through the infrastructure for an entirely new global financial system. So that's why, to your point, Jim, we're seeing a lot of integration with banks, central banks, cross-border trials under the new Bank for International Settlements frameworks, and this tokenization framework that is popping up all across BlackRock and Vanguard, and you're seeing everybody get involved, but it's popping up also across Asia, the Middle East, Latin America. This is happening worldwide. So, from your perspective, Jim, and I know you did tackle this briefly, but what do you think the real motive here is? We are indeed witnessing like a controlled demolition and transition from a dollar-based system to a multipolar settlement network.
I think the objective is to replace the traditional, let's just call it paper-based, paper and email and phone-based old technology banking system. There's a transformation to replace it. And the big challenge that I foresee, and we're observing elements of it now, is that the old guard has a lot of power. Let's face it, in the last 10 years, it's been rather obvious, last 5 years, rather obvious that doctors and bankers are controlling the world. Doctors, bankers, and militaries. Well, the militaries aren't controlling as much as they're fighting each other. But, where does the power lie? Doctors, bankers, and warriors, soldiers. Okay, what I believe, you talk about the integration. I focus a bit more on the partnerships. Certainly there's integration, certainly, and expansion and building out the infrastructure. Yeah, but that is being done now in a very astute manner by Ripple with their acquisitions. Okay, I have a list. I'm looking at it right now. Hidden Road, 1.25 billion of multi-asset prime brokerage. So they got brokerage. Rail, 200 million. That's not a lot for stablecoin platform. Okay, that's great. G Treasury, I think that's really big. $1 billion acquisition for G Treasury, corporate treasury bonds. And I'm hearing it's like 15, 20,000 different corporate bonds that will be able to be moving around in the Ripple ecosphere and final bridge asset transfer with XRP. Evernorth is really clever. Another $1 billion. And I believe, and this is a bit my interpretation, but based on what I'm reading, it's a venture cap internal firm. It's a venture cap subsidiary and tech services and partnership funding. Then there's Trident, $500 million, treasury reserve management for corporations. Then you got a bunch of little ones, and I honestly hadn't heard of any except SBI Holdings out of Japan. They're like a liaison for the entire nation of Japan. And I don't know how many people are aware. I know you probably are, but it was November last year that the banking authorities in Japan ordered XRP compliance to every single Japanese financial firm for this year. Last November, they ordered that. I heard a rumor, and I can't substantiate it, but the Bank of Japan ordered no more usage of SWIFT. Yes. I tend not to believe that, but maybe it's true. They want to use XRP because they're savings.
Yes.
You know, SWIFT
I see that.
SWIFT is going to be relegated to like a secretary that handles all the data and memos. Oh, you know, I had a broker once, and he used to say, "Runner."
Well, you know, can I add something to? I want to compliment what you're saying, because you have been doing a lot of research into this. I'm excited to hear your insights. But one of the other pieces that a lot of people haven't connected yet, this is something Jake Claver has openly talked about, is the reverse carry trade. And, you know, for just some context, Japan has publicly been working with Ripple for many years. Japanese banks already have publicly committed to using XRP by 2025. Here we are. I think it's happening gradually and effectively. But they have been preparing for this very scenario because systemic stress is hitting global liquidity markets, and that's tying us back into the dollar. But as more money is going to flow back into Japan and the credit markets are going to come under more pressure, this is when you're going to have this necessity, this need for some sort of neutral instant settlement system that's outside of the dollar or even the yen. That becomes unavoidable. And that's exactly how XRP can play a critical role in Japanese banking infrastructure as a bridge asset for on-demand liquidity. So it's very interesting to see how all of this is really accelerating, to your point.
Let me make a third point. Okay, I came with my notes. These are major points in my opinion. And, you know, I can get to the Japanese yen carry trade in a bit, because that's huge, and I've been talking about that for 5 years. Okay, let me go back a little walk back in the 1980s, when I'm not sure. I don't think you were alive. No. Okay, I finished my doctorate in 1980, and I got a job at Digital Equipment Corporation. Mm-hmm. And 4 years later, I left the quality control area of that business. And we were number 2 at the time. I'm a Decky. I will be a Decky for as long as I live. Digital Equipment Corporation, DEC, DEC. It was IBM number 1, DEC number 2, Hewlett Packard number 3. When I got to the marketing research job, I changed jobs because I had a really, really crappy manager in my quality control work. That was 4 years. It wasn't wasted, but it was interfered with and not properly rewarded. So I took a raise. I took a promotion, and I went into a marketing research group. The first thing they had me do was work on a marketing research survey, big survey, 50,000 in the United States and Europe and England. And what was the focus? Unix. Now, you probably know what Unix is. You've probably heard of C and C++ and C++. Well,
no.
Okay. There are programming languages in Unix.
Okay.
C++. And now you got a raft of other programming languages, like Python is very popular, and there are a few others that I'm not very familiar with, because I predate the Unix. I was in graduate school in the 1970s. Unix came about around 1982, 3, 4. It was from AT&T. All right, why do I bring this up? Because Unix enabled interoperability. Does that zip word mean something to you now? With
yes.
XRP, interoperable, different banking systems, different structures.
Basically one settlement language.
One settlement language and one originating language. Two different incompatible languages. That's why they call XRP the bridge asset. Well, why was Unix big at the time? What was really important back then was that IBM had its hardware, and then IBM had its software built upon its operating system. all proprietary, all private. Digital, we had VAX VMS, virtual management system. It was for swapping. Now we know what swapping is again. Swapping has new meaning in the banking industry. Back then, they had swapping for memory efficiency, and you could get along with less RAM because digital and its virtual management system was extraordinarily efficient and a global leader. Okay, so if you had a bunch of software and you had 10 years invested in it at IBM, and then suddenly you're working with a new hardware system like Hewlett Packard or Honeywell or Burroughs or Digital DEC, can you move that software over? No, you could not. No, you could not. It was not interoperable. Unix was interoperable. They used to say hardware independent. And we thought, holy shit, we're going to lose our software business. And we did. And we did.
So the competition pretty much killed you with the tech.
They killed us with the tech to make the interoperable. Now,
right.
What we've got now is that XRP is interoperable. You can have one banking system like from JP Morgan, and they communicate with a Rome bank, or communicate with a Brussels bank, or a Frankfurt, Germany bank, and it's interoperable. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Dollars to Deutschmark, no, not Deutschmark, to euros. Dollars to yen in Japan. Okay, we've got a huge advantage with XRP being a leader in the interoperability. And you know, after I heard interoperable about 20 times, I thought, sounds like Unix in the 1980s. I'm telling you, Unix was a revolution in the computer industry, and XRP is going to bring about a revolution in the banking industry from its interoperability.
Yes. And that, you know, to your point also, that's what's so interesting about these discussions. Like, a lot of people think we are indeed heading towards like some sort of digital chaos, but what we're actually watching is a controlled consolidation. And through these features, like interoperability is an example, but ultimately this does leave XRP with only one option. It basically means it's becoming that settlement layer that will underpin not only fiat, but digital currencies, stable coins, etc., tokenized commodities, bonds, and even carbon credits now. And when people start to ask, you know, the question about market cap, and I dismiss market cap really. I don't think it's not something that, it's a really stupid one. Yes. Or even price range, you know, you have to understand, like, what are we truly looking at to handle the magnitude of all of this, right? And that's when we start having those discussions about a very high XRP price.
Let me quote Jake Claver. He said, I'm tired of all these market cap limitation arguments. What exactly is the market cap for email?
Yeah, it's silly.
What a great question.
Well,
what if you had to buy some tokens in order to use your email? What's the email token going to be worth? What was it worth in 1980? What would it be worth 10 years later? Another 10 years later, another 10 years later. Would it not be worth hundreds of trillions of dollars? Yes.
Yeah, but in XRP, it's a bit different. I totally agree with that and the sentiment behind it. But when a lot of listeners, they start to look at XRP, first of all, they treat it as a token. They don't realize it's been mixed in with a lot of the nonsense out there. But in XRP, liquidity is not necessarily about how many tokens actually exist in the circulating supply. It's about how much value can actually move through the system overall in each XRP itself. And that kind of ties us into the discussion we'll get into here in a moment. But the higher the price is of XRP, the more greater its liquidity efficiency is. And that means fewer and fewer tokens are going to be required to settle larger and larger transactions. And I did write an interesting article about this on X. It's getting a lot of coverage, and I really appreciate that from the rest of the community. But I gave an example in there that if you're trying to settle, for instance, worth $1 billion of a cross-border settlement, and if you had at $1 per XRP, that transaction would require 1 billion XRP. But if you had a $10,000 XRP, just to give an example, per XRP, that means it would require just 100,000 XRP. So you're significantly having fewer and fewer tokens moving across that network because there's less slippage, there's lower volatility, there's
friction.
Faster finality. Exactly.
Less friction.
Very exciting.
And that's why
I'm very optimistic about this.
That's why the big players with their big usage and their big volume and their big savings are going to want a big price.
Exactly.
It's not very difficult to follow that logic. I've actually had some good arguments with people who are what I consider to be uninformed. I don't want to call them ignorant.
Not your brother again, right?
No, I haven't talked to my brother in 5 years.
Okay.
5 years. I know that's hard to believe, but
no.
I have no interest in further communication with my brother.
I'm sorry, but yeah, that kind of goes back to the pandemic. It really destroyed lives and affected families.
Well, if you're going to advocate Marxism in the United States and be an opponent to liberty and the republic, there's the door.
Yeah, I know people like that.
I have no interest in a conversation with them.
Yeah. Sorry. Mm-hmm.
I don't know where you want to go next.
No, actually, I mean, if you don't mind, I mean, we can always remember we can bounce back and forth, and it's for us to bounce back and forth because there are so many other pieces in this that are all tied together. I do want to talk about what has transpired since we last spoke, and I'm sorry to the audience that it took a while to do part 2, but since we spoke, gold has made a significant move, and not just in price, but in purpose, and that's what's so important for people to not miss out on. It's not just a passive store of value anymore. It's gradually being reintegrated back into the monetary architecture as collateral. And when we start to dig even deeper into this, and I want to get your take on this, Jim, I'll ask you here in a second, behind this transformation, how gold is actually being remonetized at the institutional level, and of course, how XRP is being positioned as the settlement mechanism above that overlays it all. So I know you have been analyzing this for a while in depth since we last spoke. And, I want to ask, what are you seeing really in terms of gold's role? How has it changed in the last 6 months? And of course, how is it tying into what banks are doing globally and even XRP?
I think the big shift in the mindset regarding gold is that it's no longer thought of as a barbaric metal. It's no longer thought of as in terms of what income it can produce. And I got to say, Warren Buffett, you're a big fat liar. He got called away. He got called away after selling.
Mark Cuban too. Mark Cuban. I just want to put that out there.
Oh, okay, good. They got called away after writing covered calls, and they lost their silver. Well, Warren Buffett, I don't know the full story about Mark Cuban. He's a bit of a detestable figure.
He's a liar.
What I believe has happened is that there is it's hard to call it a transformation. It's a complete shift of mindset and perception. We now are recognized as having entered a tremendous unresolvable problem of having a debt foundation. We have a debt foundation and we got a gigantic debt. And we've been told that debt is a good, solid foundation, but now the big, fat $38 trillion debt is causing the entire global financial system to stutter, to fail. For instance, big banks in the United States are not lending institutions anymore. They've lost, I think, 3/4 of that function. Unless and until, for instance, the Wall Street banks and the big bank giants in the United States realize an enormous gain with XRP, they might no longer be insolvent, then they can go back to becoming a lending institution again, instead of a predatory institution that captures commercial property because they won't roll over the mortgages. Hand over your keys. I know one case, Northern Midwest, my client's friend lost $20 million because they couldn't find a rollover of their mortgage on a big property complex. Okay, so the realization, Versan, is that gold is a really effective foundation. Foundation. We need to rebuild the foundation. We got a lot of gold out there, and some nitwits, knuckleheads think, well, gold should go way down to $100 per ounce because there's so much of them.
Yeah,
so much
silly.
gold. And I tell them, this is my response, and I'm sassy. I'm always sassy. There are a lot of television sets in US and Canada. There are a lot of shoes. Why doesn't the price of TV sets go down to $20? There's a lot of supply. The reason is they're not for sale. There's a lot of gold. It's not for sale. It's set up, and it is now promised to be the foundation. And I'm just waiting for more and more digital assets to become gold related, linked to gold in some fashion. But I don't want to go down that road. I want to focus on how there's a widespread global recognition that the king dollar has destroyed the global foundation for finance.
Very powerful statement. Very true.
And XRP is very likely the top candidate to replace the Treasury bill for global trade payments.
I agree.
Let's leave out the Forex reserves, because that's the other side of, it's trade payment standard and global reserves standard. But that's pretty much up in the air and a lot of dispute. And, it's integrated with stable coins. And I think, I just think it's just a time bomb before Tether has a volcano that resembles diarrhea.
I love your analogies.
I like my metaphors. I work on my metaphors in my quiet time. Let me also say, here's another one. SWIFT is the standard bearer of banking obsolescence.
Interesting. Haven't heard that one before.
7% errors. I just had an error last week, a SWIFT error. Cost me 3 days. SWIFT error, 7% SWIFT errors. Okay, those SWIFT morons, you got to get with the 20th century here. I'm sorry, 21st century. And get in gear. And I'm afraid I would really like to hear that SWIFT is relegated to memos. Okay, hey, runner. I love that. A commodity broker would say, runner. And every time he did, I would laugh because I met him for lunch in Chicago. It was a very interesting meeting. Commodity traders, mostly bonds, currencies,